Today on the Dolby Institute Podcast, the music of Oppenheimer. Joining us is Emmy and Academy Award-winning composer Ludwig Göransson, who was on our podcast last year to talk about his work on Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Conducting this interview is our guest host and noted journalist Jon Burlingame, who's been covering music for film and television for Variety, The New York Times, and now the Dolby Institute. Take it away, Jon.
We're delighted to have with us today the composer of Oppenheimer. His award shelf already includes an Oscar for Black Panther, 2 Emmys for The Mandalorian, and 3 Grammys, 2 of which are for his work as part of Childish Gambino. Welcome, Ludwig Göransson.
Thank you, Jon. Always great to be here. Always great to see you.
Great to see you too, man. You'd previously done Tenet with Chris Nolan. Directors differ, I think, in their view of and their use of music. I wonder if you can tell me how sensitive he is to the use of music in film.
Chris has a crystal clear mind of what he's trying to do and what he wants to do and what he wants to achieve. And I think that goes for, all the departments, and obviously we all know how important music is in Chris movies and how it's almost a character in itself. But also I think what's so special about Chris is that he's very open-minded to my point of view, my input, my ideas, and we can have that back and forth and use that as a springboard to push boundaries.
So when did he reach out to you about Oppenheimer? I wonder if you saw a script or maybe just talked with him about the project before you started composing?
Absolutely. Well, after Tenet, we kept in touch. We saw some movies, we talked about film, we talked about music, but during that time, he never hints at what he's doing. You know, it's kind of a little secretively in that kind of way. So you do get the phone call out of the blue. It's like, hey, you want to read the script tomorrow? I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but you can show up at this time and you can read it. So you don't have any ideas of what it's going to be like. So, and that's also very exciting to go into a project like that.
So is that what happened? You were called in and you got a chance to read the script, and then did you guys get together? Exactly.
Yeah. I read the script. I was immediately kind of floored by how it was different than anything I've ever read before. You know, specifically reading it out of feeling like you are Oppenheimer. You're feeling everything through his point of view. And it struck me pretty early on that's what the music needs to do as well. Like, you need to channel the whole spectrum of his feelings and what he's going through and put the audience in his clothes and his emotional journey. So that was the first, take back I had from the script.
Did Chris have any specific ideas about what he thought should be music in the film?
He had one idea, and that was to use the solo violin, to portray Oppenheimer.
Did he say why?
Yeah, he was because violin as a fretless instrument, you can go from playing a really beautiful romantic tone, and within a split second, you change the intensity of the vibrato and the pressure of your right arm, the note, and you can make it into something neurotic, horrific, and manic within just a split of a second. And I thought that was extremely interesting and exciting. And then also my wife and partner, Serena Göransson, is an incredible performer and violinist. So, I took that idea back to the studio and I started to record her, and we started to work together on creating these kind of these violin experiments, that I would call it.
How much time did you have to experiment before you sort of needed to dive in fully and try to come up with themes and other ideas?
We had 3 months of experimenting and writing, coming up with the sonic landscape of the score, which I would call pre-production, because it's literally pre-production before Chris Nolan goes off to shoot. So for those 3 months, I meet up with Chris once a week at his house. We listen to the music. We analyze the instruments, we analyze the sound, we talk about what's interesting, and we do that every week. And so when he takes off to shoot, he has about 3 hours of music that we've been working on.
Oh, so you had actually written and created 3 full hours of music even before shooting started.
Exactly. Yeah. So he has these ideas already in his head when he's shooting. And sometime I get a call. It's like, hey, I'm thinking about this piece. Can we add some tension here? Or can we, or can you change the ending so it ends in an upwards feeling or in a positive note? Or so the work doesn't end even though he's off shooting. But then the real job begins when he comes back, and he goes into the edit bay and he sits there with Jennifer Lame, and they start putting together the movie, and they put together the scenes, and they already put my music in those scenes from what we already written. So when I see the first cut, it's already has all my music in it.
Yeah, so there's no temporary music from anybody else or any other project. It's your music for this project.
Yeah, and it makes everything feel like it's a new world. We're already entering a new world, and that's, I think, one of the magics of a director that knows how to use music and how important that is.
The film, it seems to me, is unusual in that it's an epic story, and yet at the same time, it's the most intimate story of a scientist and his work and his relationships. Did you somehow need to convey both sides of that in what you were doing?
Absolutely. Yeah, it goes from an intimate personal journey to, I would say, like an operatic piece, and the dynamics that you have to go through with, and we also using the dynamics between one solo violin, 4 violins, whole string orchestra. There's a great scene in the movie where you see Oppenheimer having his first class, and you see in the beginning there's one person coming in, and you have one solo violin. There's 4 people coming in, there's 4 more violins coming in, and then the whole class is sitting there, and you have the whole orchestra playing.
So is that in that sense, it's fairly literal in terms of of the string section and the class?
Yes, at times it is very literal. And there's another scene in the movie where you see the atoms swirling around,
Yes.
and that was one of the first visuals that Chris Nolan showed me. I had an early screen test. He invited me into the IMAX theater, and I sit there in this dark room, and I get hit in the face by these fluorescent lights and these visual graphics that was just taking me. It had a big impact on me, and I was thinking to myself, like, this is what I want the music to sound like. And it was also a scary thought, but because I knew I wanted to do it analog, I didn't want to use too many computers for that. And how can I get that tempo and that energy and in with live instrumentation? And that was one of the big challenges.
Is it possible to encapsulate a complex personality in music? I mean, it seems to me that one of the most impressive things about the film is that we see every aspect of Oppenheimer's personality, both his career and his own personal life. Are there aspects of his personality that require different themes or different sounds?
Yes. Just like you said, I knew that the essence of the score had to be, we had to focus on the emotional core of the music. That's the first couple of months I was only writing music for organic instruments like the strings, piano, harp, solo violin, because I knew that if we got that right, we could always later on infuse it with the synthesizers and the modern production. And in this case, that's also the trajectory of the movie. The synthesizers get slowly and slowly growing into the story, almost like an impending doom.
You bring up the synthesizers, and I was fascinated by how they came in and when and what purpose they serve. I sometimes wondered, do the synths, or I should say, perhaps more electronically generated music, are they for a specific element in the story? you know, it seems too simplistic to say, well, the strings are for people and the synths are for the research or most element, you know, the place.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I feel like to me that the way it's channeled is that the synths to me feel like it's the future. It's the impending doom that I feel like you can already sense it in him in the beginning. That's why it's just introduced slightly in the beginning. But then, you know, when the whole second act starts, you know, that up until that time, it's all been theory. It's all ideas. It's all scribbles on a paper. But then in the second act, when you have the real physical product of the bomb, you know, they're hoisting it up in the air. You're seeing like people, they're like, okay, shit, they could actually destroy the whole human race. The music takes a crazy shift there and goes from like this lush, organic musical landscape to just three sounds, you know, one of thumping bass, and then one kind of nuclear reactor kind of sound, scratching sound on the speakers, and then this little metallic ticking. This just makes you feel like, okay, this is the ticking clock here.
I have to wonder what it was like for you as the composer when you first saw those scenes of the atomic bomb as it first happened in 1945. And I wonder, you know, because if those were actually physically created effects, if you actually got to see what the final version was fairly early on.
It was fascinating, especially to be there and see how they were making these visual effects, and how I think with a lot of Chris's movies and also this one, you know, it is a period piece. And it was important to me, like, okay, we're going to use some instrumentation from that time era, but I also want to do it in a way it couldn't be done. And that's, I think, when things become timeless. And I think with how the bomb was created, you know, they're not using CGI, they're using, you know, analog real effects. And that doesn't, you know, you can't put a timestamp on that. You can't say, oh, this was created 5 years ago on that computer. You know, this feels timeless. And I also feel in that moment when everything is just building up until that explosion, you know, I can just imagine that the use of silence in that scene was in Chris's head while he was writing the movie.
Well, and that I thought was terribly, terribly impressive, because when it happens, we don't hear any music.
Yeah.
And then it feels like it sort of creeps in slowly afterwards. And I just wondered if you guys had talked at length about that moment.
We didn't need a discussion. It wasn't even we didn't even need to have that discussion.
The other question I had about getting to that point is, do you treat the black and white scenes any differently than the color scenes? Because it's really, it's a kind of objective point of view, and it's Oppenheimer's point of view. And I wonder if you could talk about whether that needed any kind of different approach.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do change the instrumentation in those scenes. The straw sounds are Rhodes and it's harp. And we're kind of changing, you know, it's kind of the mystery of his character. You know, in the beginning you feel like, oh, they're going to be good friends. This is an ally, you know, but then, you know, you want to keep some of the suspense and some of the mystery to the reveal later on. But that was definitely a creative decision that we made to change the tone of the music, just like we do on some of the other characters.
It's so interesting because we're talking about Robert Downey Jr.'s character. Yeah. When we first meet him, we don't realize that he's essentially going to be eventually turning into a kind of villain. And so it's the sort of ambiguity of it all, I think, is kind of impressive.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about when I work with Chris. You know, that scene when they first meet, that was something we did towards the end. Because we always had that kind of sense of mystery in the beginning too, but then we were like, let's go back and tackle this first meeting like they're just, you know, they're about to be good friends, you know, like, you know, this kind of almost romantic feel to it.
What about Kitty, Oppenheimer's wife, played by Emily Blunt? Did she need music of her own? Did she need a different sound or a color, perhaps?
Absolutely. You know, Oppenheimer and Jane Tatlock, you know, they have Gene Tatlock's theme is very much shadowed through Oppenheimer's music, because
that's the mistress that he has
exactly
at various times.
His lover, and because I think he sees so much of himself in her, so that's why his musical elements like almost blend into her character. So for Kitty, we needed something completely different, because she is her own powerhouse. I mean, she calls him on his bullshit. So we needed her theme, and her music is portrayed by this beautiful light kind of piano motif. In the beginning, it's just some chords in the beginning, but then through her journey and through how her character breaks out in the end, on the last kind of testifying, when she's testifying, it goes into using the whole piano with the symphonic solo violin and solo cello, and it blooms out in this big, beautiful piece of music.
The film makes clear that this was a very complicated man who became a hero and then was torn down by the very government that he served. Those later scenes in which he's essentially put on trial and publicly ruined. How did they need to be treated musically?
Yeah, that was very interesting, because Chris almost treated it like an action film. The whole third act, the trial, it's that music, he wanted it to feel like we're scoring an action film. And I thought that was a very interesting idea. He told me first, he told me they were editing that whole scene, and it was about 25 minutes long in the beginning. So he asked me to just write a 25 minute piece of music, and that had that propeller and propelling story to the arc to the music, and with a lot of intensity. So I did that. I sent that to him. He started cutting that into the trial. He sent that back to me, and I wrote a 20-minute piece. And I sent that to him. And then so it was a lot of back and forth and massaging until we came down to like the 30-minute scene that it now is. But I think it was a very interesting way of tackling that as an action set piece.
Is it possible to describe Oppenheimer's theme in words? How would you describe it?
I would say it definitely has this sense of haunting loneliness to it. And also like the way I think with Serena is playing it, with just this kind of like, it feels like hauntingly melancholic to me. And when you hear it on the solo violin, that's in its purest form, and that's really who he is. But then you have a lot of time throughout the movie when it grows and it gets played by the synth, it gets played by its whole string orchestra, and it takes on different shapes. But it has this haunting loneliness to it that I think embodies his character. Because I feel like not a lot of people really understands him.
Are there subsidiary themes for some of the other characters?
You have this kind of I would call it like Americana type of theme for Groves. It's like this kind of positive. It's very different from anything else in the movie, because they have such a special relationship.
Yeah, that's the Matt Damon character.
Yeah, the Matt Damon character. Even though like most people hate him, like Oppenheimer really gets along with him, and they have this kind of back and forth that I think is just so exciting to see. And you could have scored that in that scene when their first meeting could have been scored in so many different ways. I wouldn't have thought about that, depending on like what kind of, he's a general, like, but he has this kind of sweet, lush tonality to his character, which I thought was which is very interesting.
Are you playing yourself on any part of the score?
I mean, I'm playing piano. I'm playing
So the Fender Rhodes is you?
The Fender Rhodes, the synthesizers. I was just thinking if there's any guitar in the score, and I don't think there is any guitar in. There's might be a tiny little bit of guitar. But also one thing there's not in the score is there's no drums. There's no drums, percussion in the score.
I wanted to ask about that because I felt as the score was moving forward, I felt that I was hearing a kind of drum or sound. Are those percussive sounds that were being made by the strings and brass?
Yes, exactly. The only type of percussive sounds is like there's a little bit of collegno on the strings. There's that little metallic ticking sound from which is generated from the use of like nuclear instruments, and there's also some kind of soundscapes which are made from nuclear reactor type drum moving energy sounds, but there's no drums in the score.
No traditional timpani or anything like that.
No timpani, no taikos, no actiony drums, no big booms, and I think that's something I wasn't thinking about when I was writing it, but I was thinking about that when I was watching the movie the other day. I was like, there's no drums in here. But I feel like thanks to that, it really highlights the stomps, the stomps or the feeling of the bomb, the sound design. It really comes out in a different way.
Do you work closely with the sound people?
I do. Especially at the dub stage, I'm almost there every day when they're dubbing the movie, and Chris and I don't stop until we finish the dub, and some of the last cues come to place in the dub, and we're sitting there talking about leaving space for some sounds or whatnot. It's every department. I feel like we're very closely together.
It's fascinating to me that throughout the film, the music is treated with the same respect as the dialogue and sound effects. Really, all three are equally prominent. Is that unusual in your experience?
I think so. I feel like I saw the movie 2 days ago in London at the BFI, and I came out, I was like, the sound is so spectacular. You can, even though you're saying that, but you can hear every element so clearly anyways. Like the sound design, the music, the dialogue, the effects, like it feels so fresh to me.
I have to ask about the recording sessions.
Yeah.
Because I hear strings in this score doing things that I haven't heard maybe ever. And I'm wondering how experimental you might have gotten with the traditional, let's face it, the violin is an ancient instrument that we're still hearing and being played. But I think you're utilizing it in different ways. And I'm wondering what the recording sessions were like.
Yeah, it was hectic. It was a lot of music to record. And I think we talked a little bit about that experiment with the atoms swirling around and creating, in that piece of music, there's 21 tempo changes. So I was worried that I wasn't even thinking that we would be able to record that live. I was thinking that we were going to record 4 bars at a time, and then piece that together, and then create that music like that. But we did have a little bit of time, and then Serena actually, she was like, I think we can do it in one take. Like she was, she played with that orchestra for 20 years. She knows how great the players are, and so the last day we came up with a different type of recording technique where we gave the musicians the tempo change before it happened on the paper. So they had a new click in their headphones before the tempo change on the paper had happened. And thanks to that technique, we were able to create this 2-minute piece of music where it's just a staggering of crescendos and tempo changes throughout the whole piece of music. And we got it in one take.
You've had the opportunity to work on large-scale projects in television and in film, as well as the popular music field. So when you reflect back on the last 5 or 6 years of your journey in music, how do you see it?
I spend a lot of time into every project. I like to be completely captivated with each and every project that I do. I take one thing at a time and I go all in on that. And I also try to approach every project like I'm learning, like I'm doing something for the first time. I'm trying a different approach on everything, every project. And and it's very rewarding, that's why I love what I do, because I've put a lot of time and effort into it, but I feel like I'm getting a lot back, and I'm learning things. I'm learning, as a composer and also personally, and I'm taking all that back and putting that in my toolbox for the next project. And it's been a great journey these last couple of years, and I'm also working with these incredible collaborators that I also feel it's not going to do the same thing twice. They're constantly pushing cinema, and so right now I don't have a thing in the pipeline, but I'm going to enjoy summer with my family, and then just wait for the right thing to show up.
So how long were you on the Oppenheimer project from start to finish?
I would say about 9 months.
Is that the longest you've ever spent on one project? Or maybe Tenet was the same?
Yeah.
One?
No, Tenet was, that's the thing, like Tenet was really long. Black Panther, both Black Panthers were big projects, Tenet, Oppenheimer, and also, coming up with the Mandalorian, the first season, building that song world, that was also definitely like 2 features,
So if you had to summarize the Oppenheimer experience, what would you say?
I would say it was a crazy experience. It was very intense, but also so rewarding, and working on something that I think is gonna, create a conversation, creative discussion. I brought my parents out to the screening in London, and we had a great talk afterwards and talking about things that I haven't talked to them before. And hopefully that happened to a lot of people that sees the movie. And so I got to work with Serena on this too, record her, and it was a beautiful experience, and I'm so happy to be here and to see this movie a couple more times.
Well, thank you, Ludwig, for being with us today. It's always such a joy to talk with you.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Many thanks to Ludwig for joining us for the podcast again, and thanks to Jon for conducting that excellent interview. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Universal for putting this conversation together. Be sure to check out Oppenheimer, now in theaters. You can find links to tickets, as always, in our show notes. If you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, please be sure you are subscribed to us, the Dolby Institute Podcast. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, thanks again for joining us. This is the Dolby Institute Podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. Thanks for joining us.